inflation. What do you mean by inflation? Inflation is the persistent increase in general price level over the years. A persistent increase, a continuous increase. It is not a temporary situation. Inflation is the persistent increase in the general price level. General price level. General price level is an indicator of the relative change in price of all goods and services. It represents only the relative change. It's not an absolute change in price of all goods and services. It's a relative change in price of all goods and services. Then, because of inflation, there will be a reduction. There will be a reduction in the value of money and the living standard. What do you mean by value of money? Value of money. The purchasing power of money. The amount of goods and services that can be purchased with a given unit of money. The purchasing power of money. Then what is the living standard? Again, the amount of goods and services an individual can consume. With the inflation, cost of living will increase. Cost of living will increase, reducing the living standard. So with the same amount of money, people will be able to buy less amount of goods and services due to the increase in general price level. Then what are the major reasons for inflation? There are two major reasons. One is demand pull inflation, the other one is cost push inflation. So we have to identify these two reasons one by one. So what is the first one? Demand pull inflation. Demand pull, demand driven inflation. Inflation. What is inflation? An increase in general price level. What is demand pull? Due to the increase in aggregate demand. Due to the increase in aggregate demand. Aggregate demand. Aggregate demand consists of the total consumption of a country. That is private consumption and public consumption, and the investment and the net exports. Due to that increase in aggregate demand, there will be an increase in general price level. And it happens when the aggregate demand increases beyond the full employment level. If the economy has already reached the full employment level, if there is an increase in aggregate demand, right, firms are unable to increase the real output, so they will increase the general price level. That is the idea of demand pull inflation. This can again be interpreted as too much money chasing too few goods. Too much money. Due to too much money, aggregate demand will increase. But the real output of the country remains the same. Right? Because when there is higher amount of money, people will demand more goods and services. But the amount of goods and services remain the same. So what happens is there will be an increase in general price level. That is called demand pull inflation. This can be interpreted with this can be explained with a simple graph. Right. So in this graph, the vertical axis is the price level and the horizontal axis is the real output. Right? Price level, general price level, and the real output, real amount of goods and services, real GDP or real income. Then there are two curves here. One is the aggregate demand curve. The other one is the aggregate supply curve. Aggregate demand curve. As I told you, it's the total demand of the country, which consists of private consumption, public consumption, investment, and net exports. Exports minus imports. Right. So what is the shape of this aggregate demand curve? It is downward sloping, showing the negative relationship between price level and the aggregate demand. When the price level is higher, aggregate demand will be lower. When the price level is lower, aggregate demand will be higher. That is the negative relationship. And the aggregate supply curve shows here an extreme shape. An extreme shape, there is a smoother shape, we will discuss it later. Initially, up to the full employment level, aggregate supply curve is horizontal, showing that there is a potential to increase the real output up to the full employment level. After the full employment level, real output cannot increase, only the price level will increase. So this is an extreme shape of the aggregate supply curve. Then what are the, this is the price level at this equilibrium, price level and the real output. Then we have to identify the change, the increase in aggregate demand. First of all, what are the components in aggregate demand? As I told you, household consumption or the private consumption, and then government consumption or the public consumption, and then investment, and then net exports, export minus imports of goods and services. What is household consumption or the private consumption? It is the consumption of households. It is the household purchase of goods and services for their final consumption. Then what is the public consumption? What is the government consumption? It is the government purchase of goods and services to provide public services. The investment is the firm's purchase of capital goods. The net export refers to export minus import of goods and services. Remember, it's both goods and services. Right. Then how will there be an increase in private consumption? Private consumption will increase due to fall in interest rate or due to fall in direct taxes. And then public consumption will increase due to expansionary fiscal policy, budget policy. Right. If the government is thinking of an expansion in the fiscal operation, then public consumption will increase. Then again, investment will increase due to fall in interest rate. Due to fall in interest rate, people find it less advantageous to save. So they will borrow more and consume more and invest more. And an increase in net export is represented by a surplus in the BOP, balance of payment. Surplus in the balance of payment. So when there is an increase in these components, there will be an increase in aggregate demand, which is shown by rightward shift of the aggregate demand curve. So you can see if the aggregate demand increase from here to here, below the full employment level, if the aggregate demand increases, it does not cause an increase in general price level. But when the aggregate demand increase from 81 to 82, aggregate demand 1 to aggregate demand 2, it is beyond the full employment level. Firms are unable to increase the real output beyond the full employment. So what will they do is, they will increase the general price level from P1 to P2. It is known as demand pull inflation. The increase in general price level due to the increase in aggregate demand. Right? And this same demand pull inflation can be explained with the quantity theory of money. Quantity theory of money is explained with the equation of exchange. Equation of exchange. What is the equation of exchange? Money supply into velocity of circulation equals real GDP or general price level into real GDP or real output, which is known as nominal output. So, what is money supply? Money supply is the stock of money which is held by the public at a given time. That is the money supply. So, velocity of circulation or velocity of money, the number of times a given currency or given money circulates in the economy, right? And then general price level. General price level is an indicator of the relative change in price of all goods and services. Then real output. Real output, that's the output at constant price, where the increase in general price level or the inflation impact has been removed, has been excluded. Right? Of course, general price level is separately there and real output separately there. So general price level into real output is a nominal output. This nominal output consists of both inflation impact and the real output. Then, in the quantity theory of money, there are assumptions. In the quantity theory of money, we have to assume that velocity of circulation and real output remains constant. Right? They are assumptions. So, this theory is based on assumptions. Velocity of in the left side of the equation, velocity of circulation remains constant. The other side, real output remains constant. So mathematically what should happen? If the money supply increases by a certain percentage, let's say 10%, general price level has to increase mathematically by the same percentage, 10%. So this is a mathematical phenomenon, mathematical fact, which is practically true as well if this is the situation. What is the situation? If the real output cannot increase any further, if the real output cannot increase any further, that means if the economy has reached the full employment level, if the aggregate supply cannot increase further, if there is any further increase in money supply, what will happen? Aggregate demand will increase. People will demand more goods and services. But the amount of goods and services remain the same. What will happen then? Then the price level will increase. The firms are unable to increase the real output, they will increase the price level. That is called demand pull inflation. So when the real output is constant, especially this thing, right? And then when the money supply increases, it causes an increase in aggregate demand. People start demanding more goods and services. As a result, price level increases proportionately, in the same proportion. If the money supply increases by 10%, general price level increases by 10% as well. Right? This is known as demand pull inflation. So, now you understand when the money supply increases, there will be parallel or the proportionate increase in general price level. So, due to increase in salary, or we call it salary hike, especially the increase in salaries of the government servants, and if the government pays that salary by pumping money, by printing money, by pumping more money into the economy, by printing money, that means money supply increases, right? And if at the same time if the real output remains constant, it causes demand pull inflation. It causes an increase in general price level. So due to increase in general price level, you know the value of money decreases. Right? There will be a fall in value of money. What do you mean by value of money? Value of money? The purchasing power of money. The amount of goods and services a given money, the given amount of money can purchase. That is the real value of money. So there is an increase in salaries, but finally the value of money will decrease. What the people can purchase in the same salary will decrease. So what will happen? So will there be any increase in living standard? No. So that's what this theory says. This is practical as well, right? So then the other reason for the inflation is the cost push inflation. Cost push inflation, that is that happens due to an increase in prices of inputs. That happens due to an increase in price of all the inputs, labor and other materials. When there is an increase in price of inputs, that means increase in cost of production, what will happen? Aggregate supply will decrease. Aggregate supply, total supply of the country will decrease. That causes an increase in general price level, which is known as cost push inflation. Right? Then this also can be explained with the same graph, right? vertical axis is price level and the horizontal axis is real output or real GDP, or you can call it income, and the aggregate demand curve is downward sloping, showing the negative relationship between price level and the aggregate demand. And here I take the smooth shape of the aggregate supply curve. Earlier I used the extreme shape, and this represents that shape anyway. Initially, aggregate supply is flattened because there is a potential to have an increase in real output. But beyond a certain point, full employment level, real output cannot increase, so that will only cause an increase in general price level. So this shape of the aggregate supply curve represents that situation. Okay, so this is the initial situation. This is the equilibrium price level and the income level, and due to this increase in cost of production, aggregate supply will decrease from AS1 to AS2 due to the increase in cost of production. Then what will happen? There will be an increase in general price level from P1 to P2, which is known as cost push inflation. This is the cost push inflation. And here there's a worst situation. What is that? You can see at the same time real output also decreases, falls. Right? While there is an increase in general price level, real output also falls. Right? So this is called recession with unemployment. So what do you mean by recession? A decrease in real output. That is, actual output is below the full employment output level. That is called recession, which is characterized by unemployment in the economy. So this is a worst situation. From one side, there is an increase in general price level. From the other side, there is a decrease in real output, which is the country is in stagnant position. Stagnant position. So this is called stagflation. So what do you mean by stagflation? It is inflation with the recession. That means there is an increase in general price level while the real GDP is also falling. Then we have to identify the reasons for cost push inflation, the increase in general price level. Again, the biggest reason is the biggest reason in Sri Lanka is an increase in the price of imported raw materials, especially price of oil prices. You know that when the oil prices increases, there will be an increase in almost all the goods and services, which causes cost push inflation. And this is caused by depreciation of currency. Depreciation. The value of our currency is going down in terms of the other currency, right? Which means we are paying more rupees for the same dollar. We are paying more rupees for the same dollar. So if you are paying more rupees for the same dollar, right, while the dollar price of the imported goods remain the same, we are paying more rupees. That means it become more expensive, right? That causes cost push inflation, increasing price of all the imported raw materials and oil, right? Then indirect taxes. That means taxes on goods and services. You know, indirect taxes are added to the market price, so price level will increase obviously. Then again, a rise in salaries. You can see a rise in salaries or price of labor will cause both demand pull inflation and cost push inflation. Right? If the government prints money to pay the salaries, that causes demand pull inflation. When the private sector at this increase in salary to the market price, that causes cost push inflation. So as a result, what will happen? The value of money, the value of income will decrease, resulting in a reduction in the living standard. So inflation reduces the living standard. That is the worst impact of inflation. So I hope you understood the lesson. This is one of the hardest lessons and very important lesson in economics. So thank you very much for watching my video. I will come with another video which is very tough in economics. I will only discuss the toughest areas of economics, which will be very useful for you to for your examination purpose. Right. So I hope you enjoy this, and therefore please please subscribe my channel and then even click the bell icon so that you get notifications of when I put more videos. Thank you very much.